Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. So what does it mean to welcome the child? I wonder what it was that Jesus is really trying to help his followers understand. It seems to me that this is it's more than tolerating a nuisance child. It's more than hugging an adorable child. And it's more than encouraging all children to be all that they were meant to be. I think we can really only understand what Jesus was asking, what he was commanding, in fact, if we move from a literal reading of this story to a larger, more metaphorical one. Welcoming the child takes even greater responsibility when I consider that we and all living things are children of the universe. How do I make this leap from this piece of sacred story in Mark's Gospel? It can only happen if we understand what it was to be a child in first century Mediterranean culture. Jesus taking a child into his arms as a challenge to his disciples, arguing over who was the greatest amongst them, may seem more sentimental than anything else to us today. But it is anything but sentimental in Jesus' time. In antiquity, childhood was a time of terror. Infant mortality was 30% of live births, and 60% of all children would die before the age of 16. 60%. This caused by disease and poor hygiene. We tend now in our 21st century culture to place children first. But in this ancient culture, children were placed last. In fire, they were the last to be saved. In famine, they were the last to be fed. Children had no status and were equal to slaves. They were loved, those that survived, because they would eventually provide social security for their parents. This was also a dyadic culture that I've talked about before, a culture where you were awarded honor or shame by your community, where your family determined your position and you had no individual rights, not one. In this culture, hospitality was extended only to those who could in some way reciprocate, and honor could be awarded by your community if you were hospitable. There was no honor in extending hospitality or welcome to children because they had no way to return it. Rather, welcoming children would bring shame to any adult who did that. Can you imagine? Jesus commanding his followers to welcome a child was subjecting them to the shame that would be bestowed by their wider community. Why does he do this? I believe it is because this young child, young enough for Jesus to lift up into his arms, becomes symbol for the greater universal value of all of life, human and other than human. Jesus in the first century didn't have the benefit we do today of knowing that all living things are kin, that we are all connected to this 14 billion year old history. He didn't have the benefit of knowing that we humans have evolved from stardust, from bacteria, from jellyfish, from dinosaurs, reptiles, and mammals. Still, Jesus intuited this truth without knowing the facts. It was the deeper wisdom of God, the deeper wisdom of the universe that was at work in him to see all life as precious. No matter what the culture dictated, no matter what human conventional wisdom at the time said, Jesus was saying yes to the value of all living things in the simple yet profound act of welcoming a child. You may have recognized the words in the call to worship. They are from the Desiderata, written by Max Ehrman way back in 1927. Although some of that piece is a little dated, nearly 90 years later, there is still, for me, something quite profound and highly intuitive about this part. You are a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. The evidence, the scanty evidence that was available early in the last century pointed toward what we now understand clearly, that we are children of an evolving universe. Ehrman says, no less than the trees and the stars. Recognizing the interconnection of all things. It's too bad he hadn't said no less and no more than the trees and the stars, which might have given us more cause to pause for sober thought. However, there is no question of our right to be here and our human responsibility, the great responsibility to ensure that every child of the universe, human and other than human, is honored and welcomed. Michael Dowd shares this story near the end of his book, Thank God for Evolution, and I've been quoting it a lot, and I won't apologize for that. But this story just really resonated deeply with me. In this chapter titled Our Role, being the human role in the body of life, he speaks of to this way of being in the world where we recognize our kinship with all living things and the necessity for our species to live compassionately. And so he says, several years ago, during a question and answer period following one of my presentations, someone asked, if we are Earth, if we are universe becoming conscious of itself, why are we spoiling the air, water, and soil as if we knew nothing? Another participant in the group immediately raised his hand and asked if he could respond. I'm an oncologist, the man began. I work with cancer patients every day. From my vantage point, we are inadvertently destroying our larger body, the Earth, because we lack evolutionary guidance. We're acting like cancer cells rather than immune cells. And he continued, a cancer cell is a normal cell that for one reason or another loses its genetic memory. Cut off from the wisdom of millions of years of developmental guidance, it stops cooperating with the rest of the body, overpopulates, and proceeds to consume the very organism that supports it. The man paused and then asked rhetorically, we call our society a consumer society, and to consume something is to eat it up, right? I believe we are consuming the planet because, like cancer, we've been trying to live without evolutionary wisdom. I hadn't read Jim Taylor's article, which is in the Courier. I got the email yesterday, but read it first thing this morning, and I read it and went, good grief. I wish I had included it in here. You need to read it, folks, because he talks about stupidity. And to me, it's the same thing as cancer, that we have lost sight. And the story that he tells is of a decision that's been made in, was it in Pittsburgh?
Yes.
In Pittsburgh, where a family had challenged an oil company, or they were doing fracking because it was causing burning eyes and sores on their children. And the mining company won. And there was a gag order placed on the children for the rest of their lives not to speak about this. That, my friends, is cancer. Dowd continues, I predict, and this is the prophet in him, and he is a modern-day prophet, there's no question in my mind or heart. I predict that when millions begin celebrating our deep time story in religious ways, that will be the moment when we cease acting like cancer. We will assume an entirely new role with the body of life as an immune system, searching out problem areas and protecting our communities. It seems to me that our task as individuals is to learn to live with this evolutionary wisdom, this wisdom that has escaped several generations, this deep time wisdom, this wisdom of God. And our task as a community of faith, then, is to become mentors to others, to change the evolutionary direction towards the honoring of life in all its forms. This, I believe, is our Christ-like task in our time. May that deep wisdom, the wisdom that Proverbs tells us, that Don read this morning, whose income is better than silver, whose revenue is better than gold, may that deep wisdom be found in us, that we too might welcome every single child. Amen.